Jonathan, good to see you. So just in terms of this sort of surprise attack that we saw over the weekend with the Houthi rebels targeting Ben Gurion Airport, I mean, it's not just the fact that this missile was not intercepted. It's really just sort of shows you perhaps how vulnerable Israel could be. I mean, the Houthis are tenacious, they are aggressive, they have vowed that they're not going to stop in terms of these attacks until the war in Gaza is over. Walk us through what should be the right response by Israel here.
Yes, hi, thank you for having me back. As always, a pleasure, even though we're discussing war in the Middle East. I think we have to explain the situation with regards to the Houthis in the following ways. There's, in my mind, two options, two approaches that Israel can take when it comes to the Houthis. The Houthis, as you said very correctly, they are entrenched. They are not impressed neither by 10 years of Saudi strikes or by a year of American and UK operations. And the direct approach, the one that addresses the Houthis directly, isn't really a successful one so far. And for Israel really to do something meaningful and to be able to defend itself more effectively, then I think what Israel would have to do, militarily speaking, either a massive sustained bombing campaign of Houthi targets or boots on the ground. And I think that those two options aren't really in the book currently for various reasons of cost effectiveness and international issues, which takes me to the other option, which I call the indirect approach. And I think that we're getting closer to that, and the insinuations and the direct reference made by Prime Minister Netanyahu that he again made the link, just like President Trump did a few months ago, between the Houthis and Iran. I think that is paving the way for Israel to say, okay, we're not able to stop the Houthis militarily from attacking Israel indiscriminately and attacking our civilian sites and inflicting economic damage. So what we will do is go to the root cause and those that are supplying the weapons and the funding and the political directive for the Houthis, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran. And since the Houthis have been inflicting economic damage on Israel by striking our international airport, then that creates a balance or an opening for Israel to do the same thing in Iran. And I think that indirect approach is now what is being considered in Israeli circles.
Yeah, and President Trump condemning that attack at Ben Gurion Airport yesterday as well. And notable that Prime Minister Netanyahu retweeted a post from President Trump, as you mentioned, back in March, very hawkish against the Houthis, but namely their benefactors, they're the supporters of all their weaponry, and that obviously being Iran. Can I ask you, though, Jonathan, about this expanded operation that's being planned in Gaza right now? There are reports that there be perhaps a window of time to allow for President Trump to engage on his trip to the region and his meeting in Saudi Arabia, also for continued pressure and efforts for talks and negotiations with Hamas regarding the hostages. I see you wearing a hostage pin there now. You are a civilian, no longer in government service. But if you were still a spokesperson for the IDF, how do you explain to the Israeli public? We see that time and time again, the polls say that the top issue for them is the return of the hostages. How do you explain to the Israeli public that the Prime Minister, as he said so bluntly, that the supreme goal right now is defeating Hamas, even if that means prioritizing that over the return of the hostages?
Yeah, as you say correctly, you note I'm wearing this pin, and I have been wearing this pin ever since I took off my uniform in a year and a half, almost a year and a half ago. I feel their pain, and I want all of our hostages to be freed. They should be freed by Hamas. It's 59 people, probably 24 of them are alive, and they're held by Hamas, and not enough pressure is put on Hamas. I think that it's a bit, we're a bit detached from reality. If we look into, books of how war is managed, then the basic thing that you want to do when you fight a war, whether you started it or you didn't, as Israel, we didn't start this war, but when you're forced to fight a war, the number one objective is to win the war and to defeat the enemy. And in our case, that isn't different. Our objective, the Israeli objective, as a country that has been attacked on several fronts, but specifically from Gaza, is to defeat the enemy, so to make sure that there won't be future threats to all of Israel. Now, I've been saying truthfully for many months that I do not think, and I do not believe professionally, that we can have these both two things. We cannot get rid of Hamas and get all of our live hostages back. I think that Hamas, being the murderous and cowardly terrorists that they are, they won't allow the return of Israeli hostages as we are advancing and as Israel will defeat them militarily. And now, finally, the Israeli Prime Minister, and I think it's high time that he has said so in his own voice, is saying it clearly that there is a hierarchy of goals, and that the supreme goal, just like in any other war, is first and foremost to defeat the enemy so that we can move on and rebuild the South, allow people to go back home, and also allow the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. There is a situation there that we need to attend to. And I think that what the IDF is doing is trying to walk a very thin and balanced line. On one hand, operating in order to get the hostages back, but then on the other hand, also communicating very clearly to decision makers that the options and the ability of the IDF to get live hostages back is limited, and decision makers have to be aware of it. Now, I hope that what's going to happen now is that that Hamas will be deterred by the fact that Israel is building this offensive, and that they will hand over the hostages, surrender, and give up their weapons so that we can start a new stage here. What Jeremy spoke about, humanitarian aid, etc., you have to understand that humanitarian aid is how Hamas is still in control of Gaza. It isn't distributed and controlled by so-called humanitarian organizations. This is aid that Hamas and Hamas thugs on the ground are controlling, and they're preventing it from getting to civilians, and they're conditioning aid to people in loyalty to Hamas. And we see this all over the Gaza Strip. And the moment that the IDF will go in and push Hamas out and start distributing food directly or indirectly through international organizations, that will be the time that for the first time there will be a threat to the rule of Hamas over the Gaza Strip. And then what I think we will see is a significant spike in fighting and in Hamas activity, because then they will have a real incentive to fight. Currently, they're laying low, they're hiding in their tunnels, and they're not engaging IDF on the ground. But when that happens, when Israel will start to actually administer aid, that will be a threat to Hamas, and then I think we will see a significant rise in activity.
Jonathan, what happens though in the meantime? I mean, some of the images that we're actually seeing images on your, I mean, I know you can't see the screen, but we're seeing images of people just lining up to get food. And as Jeremy pointed out, this could literally be the only thing that they eat in a single day. And I'm sure, Jonathan, that these images pain you, especially when it comes to seeing children suffering. Very few people can take seeing children suffer. I know that I certainly can't. So when you think about what happens next, I mean, obviously you talk about, well, when Israel gets in there, they're going to distribute the aid, etc. But in the meantime, with this 2-month blockade on Gaza, we know that civilians are suffering. What is the solution on that front, Jonathan?
The solution is to get rid of Hamas, really. And civilian suffering is clear. That's unfortunately the situation in war.
But in the meantime, obviously
it
takes a while. Jonathan, it takes a while to get rid of Hamas, right? This war has been going on for a very long time. We're coming up to almost 2 years. I mean, in addition, aside from getting rid of Hamas, because we know that can take a long time, what happens in the interim to civilians who are suffering on the ground?
Well, as you said very correctly before, what's going on is negotiations. Israel wants its hostages back, and it wants to defeat Hamas, and it is using the various tools at its disposal gradually in order to apply pressure. You said it very correctly, and what you're seeing is pressure applied on Hamas, and in order to force Hamas to hand over hostages and to surrender in the war. That's exactly what's going on. And while I definitely feel for people, civilians who are caught in the middle, I feel much more for Israel, and I feel for the hostage families, and I feel for the future of my country, which I know will be unsafe if Hamas stays in power. So what I think needs to happen is for there to be significant pressure on Hamas to surrender, to be disarmed from its weapons, to hand over the hostages, and then a new day can begin in Gaza. It is up to Egypt to help that happen. It is up to Egypt to allow people to flee this war zone. I know that you've been covering this for a year and a half and even before that, but have we ever thought about the fact that the Gazans are the only civilians in the world, in the history of warfare, that have been prevented from leaving a battle space? They are the only civilians who have been kept in very cruelly by the international community, in this case specifically by Egypt. They've been prevented from leaving. I can think of no other conflict in the world where civilians have been prevented from leaving a battle space, and I think that in itself is what is really basically wrong here. People should be allowed to leave, and they should be allowed to have a temporary refuge somewhere else, just like the situation in Syria and in other battle zones in Africa, and what happened in Iraq and Syria before that. When there's fighting, people are allowed to leave. It is sad and I think extremely cruel and also hypocritical that Palestinians are prevented from leaving the battle space and they're forced to stay under the very cruel and tyrannical regime of Hamas. And as you say, they have very difficult conditions under the responsibility of Hamas, and because they're not being allowed to leave and flee and evacuate by Egypt.
Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, stay informed and inspired. This is Djobnik signing off.